Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. It's Jerry B here at Lucero Library. I hope you all are doing well, doing safe, keeping those masks on your face. We are going to be doing Tales from the Stacks. I haven't been here in a couple of weeks, so it's going to be a fresher for me to come back and say hello to the old Charlotte's Web. So we'll get started with the Tales from the Stacks. It looks like Miss Christie left us off on Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is called An Explosion. I would like to thank the publishers for allowing us to read this. This is going to be Harper and Collins. So thank you, Harper and Collins, for allowing us to read this. Without further ado, An Explosion. A day after the spider waited, head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour, she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web. And she felt sure that if she thought long enough about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her. Finally, one morning towards the middle of July, the idea came. Why, how perfectly simple, she said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on the Zuckerman. If I could fool a bug, thought Charlotte, I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as bugs. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. I was just thinking, said the spider, that people are very gullible. What's gullible mean? Easy to fool, said Charlotte. That's a mercy, replied Wilbur, and he laid down in the shade off his fence and went to sleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone. She knew she didn't have much time. That summer, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Averill wandered onto the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. Fern had the crown of a daisy on her head, in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen. Just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Miss Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding out his hand for pie. Take that thing out of here, said Miss Zuckerman. It's hot, said Fern. He almost died, that frog. He's not, said Avery. He let me scratch him between his eyes. The frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're getting your pie on you, said Fern. Come on, said Fern. Can I look for an egg in the hen house, Aunt Edith? Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens. It's getting all over everything, shouted Fern. His pie is all in over his front. Come on, frog, cried Avery. He scooped up his frog. The frog kicked, splashed soapy water onto the blueberry pie. Another crisis, groaned Fern. Let's swing in the swing, said Avery. The children ran to the bar. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the county. He was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over the north doorway, and the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on. It was arranged so that when you could swing without being pushed. You climbed into the ladder on the hayloft, then hold the rope. You stood at the edge, looked down, and were scared and dizzy. Then you straddled the knot so that it acted like a seat. Then you got up your nerve, took a big, deep breath, and jumped. For a second, you seemed to be falling to the barn floor below. But then suddenly the rope would begin to catch you, and you would sail through the barn door, going through at a mile a minute, with the wind whistling in your ears and eyes and hair. Then you would zoom upwards toward the sky and look up at the clouds, and the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn around with the rope. Then you would drop back down, 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 out of the sky and come sailing back into the barn, almost into the hayloft, then sail out again. Not quite so far this time, and then again, not quite so high, and then out, and then in, and then out, and then in. And then you'd try to jump off and fall down and let someone else try. Mothers for miles worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared some child would fall off, but no child ever did. Children almost always hung on things tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed up to the hayloft. The last time I swung on this swing, I almost crashed into a barn swallow, he yelled. Take that frog out, ordered Fern. Hey, look, it's a big spider, he said. It's tremendous. Leave it alone, commanded Fern. You've got a frog. Isn't that enough? It's a fine spider, and I'm going to have to capture it, said Avery. He took the cover off his candy box, and then he picked up a stick. I'm going to knock off that old spider into this box, he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeded in catching her. You stop it, Avery, cried Fern. Avery put one leg over the fence of the pig pen, and he was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed at the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and then came down with a slap. A goose egg was right underneath it, and there was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and then a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with terrible gas from the smell of the rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scurried away to the barn. Good night, screamed Avery. Good night. What a stink. Let's get out of here. Fern was crying. She was holding her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose. Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. It had been a narrow escape. Later on in the morning, the animals came up from the pasture. The sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell, and Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again of how the arable boy who had tried to capture Charlotte, and now the smell of the broken egg drove him away in the time. It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life, said Wilbur. The goose was proud of her share in the adventure. I'm delighted. that the egg never hatched, she gabbled. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg, but he couldn't resist boasting. It pays to save things, he said in a surly voice. A rat never knows when something's gonna come in handy, and I never throw anything away. Well, said one of the lambs, the whole business is all well and good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? That smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that's perfumed with rotten egg? Don't worry, you'll get used to it, Templeton said. He sat up, pulled his whiskers with his long whiskers, pulled wisely at his long whiskers, and then crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Lurvy shows up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped short a few paces from the pig pen. He sniffed in the air and made a face. What in thunder, he said. Setting the pail down, he picked up a stick that Avery had dropped. Pried the trough up. Rats, he said. Phew! I might have known a rat would nest under this trough. How I hate rats. And Lurvy dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying the broken egg and all of Templeton's other possessions. Then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured the slop and creamily ran down around the pig's eyes and ears. Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked and gulped, making swishing and swooshing noises, anxiously to get everything at once. It was a delicious meal. Skim milk, wheat muddlings, leftover pancakes, half a donut, a rind of a summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, a third of a ginger snap, a fish tail, 1 orange peel, several noodles from a noodle soup, and scrum off of the cup of cola, an ancient jelly roll, a strip of pepper from the lining of the garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wilbur ate it heartily. He planned to leave half noodles and a few droppings of milk for Templeton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and Charlotte was trying to save his life. So he left a whole noodle instead of a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared and the barn smelt good again. The afternoon passed and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breath of the evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She descended into the corner of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily, while the other creatures drowsed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed that she was at work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed over his favorite corner, and goslings whistled in the night song. Charlotte tore a section out of her web, leaving an opening in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take its place out of the threads she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump around the middle of the night, the spider was still at work. Chapter 11. The Miracle. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. On foggy mountains, Charlotte's Web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened like a light, and it made patterns of loveliness and mystery, like a delicate veil. Even Lurvy, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. He noticed how clearly it had shown up, and he had noticed how big and carefully built it was. Then he took another look, and he saw something in that made him set his pail down. There, in the center of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message. It said, "Some pig." Lurvy felt weak. He brushed his hands across his eyes, and he stared harder at Charlotte's Web. "I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house to call Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you better come down to the pig pen," he said. "What's the trouble?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with the pig?" "Not exactly," said Lurvy. "Come see for yourself." The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Lurvy pointed at the spiderweb. "Do you see what I see?" he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing on the web. Then he murmured the words, "Some pig." Then he looked at Lurvy. They both began to tremble. Charlotte, sleepy after their night's excursion, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. "Some pig," muttered Lurvy in a low voice. "Some pig." Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur. Then they stared at Charlotte. You don't suppose that the spider," began Mr. Zuckerman. But then he shook his head and didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back to the house and spoke to his wife. "Edith, something has happened," he said in a weak voice. He went into the living room and sat down, and Miss Zuckerman followed. "I've got something to tell you, Edith," he said. "You better sit down." Mr. Zuckerman sank into her chair. She looked pale and frightened. "Edith," he said, trying to keep his words steady, "I think you had the best be told that we have a very unusual pig." A look of complete bewilderment came over Miss Zuckerman's face. "Homer Zuckerman, what in the world are you talking about?" she said. "This is a very serious thing, Edith," he replied. "Our pig is completely out of the ordinary." "What's unusual about the pig?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who had begun recovering from her scare. "Well, I don't really know yet," said Mr. Zuckerman. "But we received a sign, Edith. A mysterious sign. A miracle has happened on this farm. There's a large spider web in the doorway of the barn cellar, right over the pig pen. And when Lurvy went down to feed the pigs this morning, he noticed that the web because it was foggy. And you know how the spider webs look very distinct in the fog. And right bang in the middle of the web were the words, "Some pig." The words were woven right into the web. They were actually part of the web, Edith. I know because I've been down there and seen them, he said. "Some pig." Just clear as can be. There could be no mistake about it. A miracle has happened. A sight has occurred here on earth, right on our farm, and we have no ordinary pig. "Well," said Miss Zuckerman, "it seems to me that you're a little off. It seems to me that we have no ordinary spider." "Oh no," said Mr. Zuckerman. "It's the pig that's unusual. It says so right there in the middle of the web." "Maybe so," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Just the same, I intend to have a look at that spider." "It's just a common gray spider," said Zuckerman. They got up and together and walked down to Wilbur's yard. "You see, Edith, it's just a common gray spider." Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Lurvy was still standing there, and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman, all three stood for about an hour reading the words on the web over and over and watching Wilbur. Charlotte was delighted with her new trick and how well it was working. She sat without moving a muscle and listened to the conversations of the people. When a small fly blundered into the web just beyond the word pig, Charlotte dropped down quickly, rolled the fly up, and carried it out of the way. After a while, the fog lifted. The water dried off, the words didn't show up so plainly. The Zuckermans and Lurvy walked back to the house. Just before they left the pig pen, Mr. Zuckerman took one last look at Wilbur. "You know," he said in an important voice, "I thought all along that this pig of ours would be an extra good one. He's a solid pig. The pig is as solid as they come. You notice how solid it is around his shoulders, Lurvy." Sure I do," said Lurvy. "I've always noticed that pig. He's quite a pig. He's long and he's smooth," said Zuckerman. "That's right," agreed Lurvy. "He's smooth as they come. He's some pig." When Zuckerman got back to the house, he took off his work clothes and put on his best suit. Then he got into the car and drove down to his minister's house. He sat for an hour and explained to the minister that a miracle had come on his farm. "So far," said Mr. Zuckerman, "all 4 people on earth know about this miracle. Myself, my wife, Edith, my hired man, Lurvy, and you. Don't tell anybody else," said the minister. "We don't know what it means yet, but perhaps if I give it thought to it, I can explain it in my sermon next Sunday. There can be no doubt that you must have an unusual pig. I intended to speak about about it in my sermon and point out the fact that this community has been visited by a wondrous animal. By the way, does this pig have a name? Why, yes, said Mr. Zuckerman. My little niece calls him Wilbur. She's a rather queer child, full of notions. She raised the pig on a bottle and brought him from when he was a month old. He shook hands with the minister and left. Secrets are hard to keep. Long before Sunday came, the news spread all over the county. Everyone knew that a sign had appeared in a spider's web on the Zuckerman's place. Everyone knew that the Zuckermans had a wondrous pig. People came from miles around to look at Wilbur and read the words on Charlotte's web. The Zuckerman's driveway was full of cars and trucks from morning until evening. Fords and Chevys and Buick Roadmasters and GMC pickups and Plymouths and Studebakers and Packards and DeSotos and the Gyromatic transmissions and Oldsmobiles with rocket engines and Jeep station wagons and Pontiacs. The hills and the farmers came rattling down on buggies. The buckboards to stand hours and hours at Wilbur admiring the miraculous animal. All said that they had never seen a pig before in their lives. When Fern told her mother that Avery had tried to hit Zuckerman's spider with a stick, Miss Arable was so shocked she sent Avery to bed without any supper as punishment. In the days followed, Mr. Zuckerman was so busy entertaining visitors that he neglected some of his farm work. He wore his good clothes all the time now. Got right into them and when he got up in the morning, Mrs. Zuckerman prepared special meals for Wilbur. Lurvy shaved and got a haircut, and his principal farm duty was to feed the pig while people were looking on. Mr. Zuckerman ordered Lurvy to increase Wilbur's feed from 3 meals to 4 meals a day. The Zuckermans were so busy with visitors, they forgot other things on the farm. The blackberries got ripe, and Miss Zuckerman failed to pull any of the blackberry jam. The corn needed hoeing, but Lurvy didn't find time to hoe it. On Sunday, the church was full. The minister explained the miracle. He said that the words on the spider's web provided that human beings must always be on the watch for coming wonders. All in all, the Zuckerman's pig pen was the center of attention. Fern was happy, for she felt that Charlotte's trick was working and that Wilbur's life would be saved. But she found the barn was not nearly as pleasant. Too many people. She liked it better when she could be all alone with her friends and the animals. I'd like to thank everybody for hanging out with me today and participating in the Tales from the Stacks. This was Charlotte's Web. If you guys are excited about it or missed any of the past chapters, you can either choose to rewatch some of the past events, or you can come check out Charlotte's Web from the library. For those of you who are watching and who have paid attention to the whole thing, I'm doing a chili restore class tomorrow, so there's going to be a special catchphrase. So if you call the library, tell them that the ice waters. Tell them you want some ice water, because the chili is so hot, it's going to make your ice water. So if you ask for ice water, you'll get boxes of chili or 2 bushels of chili, so you can help make a bigger ristra for tomorrow's class. So we'll hope to hear from you guys soon. Hope you guys are watching. Hope you guys are paying attention. Peace out. I'm Jerry V. Tales from the Stacks. Out.